The night was hot enough to make the wooden floors of Dusty's saloon creak like old bones. The crowd had been there since sunset. Locals, travelers, and ranch hands who had come in from the edges of the Texas plains, their boots caked in dust and their hearts hungry for whiskey and song. Fiddle strings hummed like restless spirits, and laughter drifted between tables, thick with the smell of beer and tobacco. But in the corner near the jukebox, where the shadows stretched longest, she sat alone. Her name was Ellie Mae Carson, though no one said it aloud anymore. Once, her name had turned heads, the kind of name that danced through radio talk and county fair gossip. But now she was just that quiet girl, the one who never danced, never laughed, never joined in. She sat with a glass of sweet tea, untouched for an hour, watching the dance floor the way someone watches rain from behind glass, close enough to feel it, too far to touch. The band struck up another tune, something fast and warm. Boots hit the floor in rhythm, skirts whirled, and hats tipped. The air smelled like hay, perfume, and old wood. Ellie shifted, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. Once, she'd been the best dancer in Mason County. Her mama had taught her how to two-step before she could write her name. She'd won ribbons, 2 ribbons she'd kept tucked away in a box she hadn't opened since the night Tommy Joe Miller left. Tommy Joe had been the kind of man who made promises with his eyes. He'd danced with her every night for 2 summers straight, said he'd build her a porch with a swing, said she'd never have to wait for a song alone. But one August night, he'd left for Amarillo with a rodeo dream and another girl's lipstick on his collar. That was 3 years ago. Since then, Ellie Mae had stayed home most nights, sewing quilts for her aunt's shop and listening to country stations on low volume. When she did come to town, she stayed in corners, waiting for a reason to leave. And tonight would have been no different except for him. The cowboy had been standing at the bar for 20 minutes before she noticed him. Tall, broad-shouldered, and sun-browned, he looked like he'd stepped straight out of a western. His hat was tilted low, his jaw covered in a few days' worth of scruff, and his shirt sleeves were rolled just enough to show the dust and scars of hard work. He wasn't loud like the others. He didn't slap backs or tell stories. He just leaned against the bar, sipping his drink, watching the dance floor the same way Ellie did. Like it meant something. When their eyes met, it was only for a second. She looked away first, always did, but something about that second, a quiet, unspoken, stayed with her. The band struck up another song, Boots and Hearts, upbeat and rowdy. The floor filled up again. "Go on, Ellie Mae," someone called from a nearby table. "Ain't you gonna show these girls how it's done?" She forced a smile. "Not tonight." They laughed and turned back to their partners. The cowboy at the bar finished his drink, set it down, and turned slowly. His gaze swept across the room, stopping right where she sat. Ellie looked down, pretending to adjust her skirt. She could feel her pulse tick against her neck. And then he started walking. He crossed the floor in long, sure strides, boots hitting the boards like a heartbeat. The noise of the bar seemed to fade around them. Ellie looked up just as he stopped in front of her. "Even in," he said, voice low and calm. "Even in," she echoed, not trusting herself to look him in the eye for long. He held out a rough, calloused hand. "You look like you're waiting on someone to ask you to dance." She blinked. "No one's asked me in a long time." He smiled, a small thing that looked honest. "Then I reckon it's about time someone did." Her breath caught. "You don't even know my name." He tipped his hat. "Name's Luke Weston. Guess we can start there." For a moment, Ellie thought of all the reasons to say number. Her heart was safer here in the corner. She wasn't the girl who danced anymore. But something in his voice, steady, patient, unhurried, made her want to forget the rules she'd built around herself. She took his hand. It was warm and firm, the kind of hand that could hold a rope steady or mend a fence before dawn. He led her onto the floor, the crowd parting just enough. The song changed to something slower, older, the kind of tune you feel more than hear. Luke placed one hand at her waist, the other still holding hers. The moment his palm touched her, something inside her loosened. They began to move. At first, she was stiff, careful, afraid of remembering how much she'd missed this. But Luke's steps were easy, confident without being pushy. He guided her gently, and soon her feet remembered what her heart had forgotten. She moved with him, the two of them gliding across the floor like this song had been written just for them. Around them, laughter and chatter softened. Even the fiddle player slowed his bow, watching as they spun once, twice, in perfect time. Ellie smiled, and really smiled for the first time in years. "See?" Luke murmured near her ear. "Ain't so bad, is it?" She shook her head. "Feels like breathing again." They danced until the song faded into applause. Someone whistled. Ellie blushed, stepping back. Luke didn't let go right away. "You're good," he said softly. "Used to be," she replied, "before life got in the way." He nodded like he understood. "Life's good at that." They walked back to her table. Ellie sat, heart still racing. Luke leaned against a chair beside her. "So, Miss Ellie Mae," he said, "you from around here?" She hesitated. "Born and raised, never left Mason County." "Then maybe you can tell me where a man can find a decent place to sleep that ain't full of rodeo boys and broken jukeboxes." She laughed. "That'd be my aunt's inn up on Willow Creek, clean sheets and quiet nights." "Sounds like heaven," he said with a grin. They talked about horses, about weather, about how small towns never really change. Luke told her he'd come from Oklahoma, chasing work in open sky. He'd been a ranch hand, a drifter, and on Sia a bull rider. When he mentioned the rodeo, Ellie's chest tightened. "You ride bulls?" she asked carefully. "Used to," he said. "Got busted ribs for my trouble. These days I stick to fence posts and cattle drives." She smiled faintly. "Good. Rodeo boys tend to leave a mess behind." Luke's eyes softened. "Someone leave one for you?" She didn't answer right away. The jukebox clicked on again, spinning out another slow song. "Yeah," she said finally. "A long time ago." He didn't push, just nodded, the way a man nods when he knows pain by its real name. The night went on. People came and went. The lights dimmed. The laughter grew tired. Ellie lost count of the songs. Sometimes they danced. Sometimes they just talked. It felt easy, like something she'd been missing but hadn't known how to ask for. When the clock above the bar struck midnight, Luke stood and reached for his hat. "Guess I'd better head out before the place locks up." Ellie felt a tug of disappointment. "You headed far?" "Couple miles north," he said. "Got my truck parked out by the ridge. Figured I'd camp there at night, watch the sunrise." She hesitated, then stood too. "It's cold up there this time of year," he grinned. "Cold don't bother me much." They walked outside together. The night air was cooler now, the moon bright enough to paint silver on the dirt road. "Thanks for the dance," Ellie said. "Don't thank me," he replied. "I should be thanking you. Been a long time since I danced with someone who didn't step on my boots." She laughed softly. "You make it easy." He tilted his hat. "Maybe I'll see you around." She looked up, meeting his eyes in the moonlight. "Maybe." And then he was gone, his boots crunching on gravel, his figure fading into the dark. Ellie stood there long after he disappeared. The air smelled like cedar and dust, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. The house was quiet, her aunt already gone to town. On impulse, Ellie pulled on her boots, grabbed her coat, and drove her old truck up toward the ridge. When she reached the top, she saw eye to the pickup from last night, parked near the fence line. Luke sat on the tailgate, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the sky turn from black to gold. He looked up when he heard her truck. "Didn't figure you for an early riser." "I ain't usually," she said, stepping out, "but I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about that last song." He chuckled. "You mean the one I almost tripped on?" She shook her head. "The one before it. The one that felt like a beginning." He looked at her for a long moment, something quiet passing between them. Then he slid over, patting the tailgate beside him. She sat. They watched the sun rise, painting the hills in light. The silence between them was easy, comfortable. "You ever think about leaving this town?" he asked after a while. "Used to," she said, "but I always stayed. Thought maybe there was nothing left out there for me." He nodded toward the horizon. "Maybe it ain't about what's out there. Maybe it's about who you walk beside." Ellie smiled. "You sound like a man who's done a lot of walking." "Maybe," he said softly, "but maybe I'm ready to stop moving." They sat there until the sun climbed high, until the chill melted off the land. When they finally headed back to town, Ellie felt something different, a lightness she hadn't felt since she was 19 and still believed in love songs. Over the weeks that followed, Luke didn't drift away like she expected. He found work at a nearby ranch, mending fences, training horses. Every Friday night, without fail, he showed up at Dusty's. Sometimes he'd sit with her, sometimes he'd dance with other folks first, but he always came back to her for the last song. People started to notice. "Ellie Mae's dancing again," they whispered. "About time," someone else said. Even the old bartender smiled when Luke would walk in, tip his hat, and say, "Even in, Miss Ellie, care to dance?" And every time, she'd say yes. Months passed, spring rolled into summer, and the town fair came around again, up the same one where Ellie had once won her dancing ribbons. The music blared, children ran with cotton candy, and the stage lights glittered under the stars. Luke found her near the food stalls, holding a caramel apple. "Dance with me," he said, offering his hand. She laughed. "You know everyone's watching." "Let 'em," he said. "Ain't no shame in being seen happy." So they danced under strings of yellow lights, surrounded by music and laughter. For the first time, Ellie didn't care who was looking. When the song ended, Luke didn't let go. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a silver locket on a thin chain. "Found this at the pawn shop," he said. "Thought maybe it belonged to someone who needed a reminder she deserves more than memories." Her eyes filled. Inside the locket was a tiny charm shaped like a pair of dancing boots. She looked up at him, words caught in her throat. He smiled. "Ain't gotta say nothin', Ellie Mae. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" she whispered. "Don't wait for someone to ask next time. If you wanna dance, you just dance." Her tears broke into a laugh. "Deal." And then she kissed him soft, sure, like she'd known him her whole life and was finally finding her way home. The crowd around them cheered. Somewhere, the band struck up another tune. Ellie rested her head on Luke's shoulder, the locket warm against her chest. For once, she didn't feel like a shadow in the corner. She felt seen. She felt alive. The night spun around the music, lights, wind, and for the first time since that old heartbreak years ago, Ellie Mae Carson wasn't waiting for someone to cross the room. Someone already had, and he'd taught her to dance again. Word count, 2,570.